The opening Sunday of the season in Cleveland had all the makings of another nervous chapter in the city's long and painful quarterback saga. The tailgates were buzzing, the stadium was full, and everyone was watching with equal parts excitement and skepticism. Shedeur Sanders, rookie, fifth-round pick, son of a sports legend, wasn't just making his first NFL start. He was stepping into a role that had swallowed countless others whole.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Critics had lined up all summer to say he wasn't ready. Too young, too raw, too much hype because of his last name. Even some of the Browns' own fan base had grumbled about the decision to draft him, pointing to holes in the roster they thought could have been addressed instead. By kickoff, the questions were as loud as the cheers. And then Sanders took the field, and within minutes, the noise changed. From the first snap, you could see the difference. This wasn't a quarterback just trying to survive his debut. He was running the offense like he'd been doing it for years. His first drive was pure statement, a quick rhythm pass to get the ball rolling, a sharp out route to move the chains, and then the moment that sent 70,000 people into a frenzy. A 42-yard rainbow down the sideline, perfectly placed over the cornerback's shoulder into the hands of Amari Cooper. It was a throw that not only flipped the field, but also flipped the mood in the stadium from anxious to electric. The drive ended in a touchdown, and it felt like Cleveland was collectively exhaling. Years of false starts and half measures had conditioned fans to wait for the other shoe to drop, but Sanders wasn't giving them a reason to doubt. The Browns' defense did its part, forcing Carolina into an early punt. But this game was about the offense. On the second possession, Sanders faced his first real test, third and long, pocket collapsing, a linebacker screaming off the edge. He didn't panic. He stepped up, kept his eyes downfield, and fired a dart to David Njoku over the middle for 17 yards. The crowd roared again, not just for the completion, but for the poise it took to make it. By halftime, Sanders had already orchestrated 3 scoring drives, spreading the ball around to 7 different receivers. He wasn't leaning on one hot hand. He was reading the defense, taking what they gave him, and attacking every weak spot they exposed. The Panthers' pass rush tried to rattle him with blitzes, but his quick release and smart protection checks neutralized most of their pressure. It wasn't all fireworks. There were incompletions, a few missed connections, but what stood out was his control. He didn't force throws into double coverage. He didn't try to be a hero on every snap. When a play wasn't there, he threw it away and lived to fight another down. That kind of decision-making is rare in a rookie, and it was exactly what the Browns needed. The third quarter brought Sanders' signature moment of the game, a 12-play, 7-minute drive that bled the clock and broke the Panthers' will. It wasn't flashy, no deep bombs, no busted cover big plays, just a steady march down the field, mixing short passes, quick runs, and smart third down conversions. On 3rd and 5 from the Carolina 12, Sanders rolled right, saw the linebacker bite on his pump fake, and zipped a pass to Cedric Tillman in the corner for a touchdown. The stadium exploded, and Sanders jogged calmly to the sideline, helmet in hand, as if he'd just completed a routine drill in practice. By the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the Browns were in full control. The defense continued to dominate, but even they knew this was Sanders' day. Myles Garrett was grinning on the sideline, pointing toward the rookie after each stop. Offensive linemen were slapping him on the helmet between drives. And the fans, well, they'd stopped talking about potential and started talking about playoffs. The final whistle blew with the scoreboard reading 30-10, and it was more than just a win. It was a declaration. The rookie had thrown for 14 completions on 23 attempts, over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and, most importantly, no turnovers. It was the kind of clean, efficient, confident performance that coaches dream about, and it had just come from a player who, 2 months earlier, had been dismissed by some as a project. In the locker room, the atmosphere was electric. Stefanski gathered the team and, without hesitation, handed Sanders the game ball. "That's how you set the tone," he said, his voice cutting through the cheers. Sanders just smiled, holding the ball in one hand and shaking hands with teammates in the other. Reporters flooded his locker soon after, peppering him with questions about silencing critics, living up to expectations, and leading the team. His answers were measured, almost understated. "It's just one game," he said. "We've got a long season. I'm just doing my job and trusting my guys." But make no mistake, inside that locker room, everyone knew something had shifted. This wasn't the story of a rookie getting lucky in week 1. This was the story of a team finding its quarterback, and a quarterback finding his team. Even ownership felt the change. Jimmy Haslam, who had taken heat for backing Sanders in the draft room, spoke to the media afterward with a rare note of "I told you so" in his voice. "We believed in Shedeur from day one," he said. "This is just the beginning." The fans felt it too. By Monday morning, Sanders jerseys were selling out in the team shop. Clips of his deep ball to Cooper were all over social media, paired with captions like "QB1 is here and the future is now." Former players and current NFL stars chimed in online, praising his composure and leadership. The Panthers' defense, for their part, admitted they'd been surprised. "He didn't look like a rookie out there," one Carolina linebacker told a reporter. "He was reading us like he'd been in the league for years." The Browns' next opponent surely took note, and the NFL as a whole had to start reconsidering the narrative. Sanders wasn't just holding down the spot until a veteran could take over. He was staking his claim as the leader of the franchise. The beauty of his debut wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the way he carried himself, calm under pressure, focused in the huddle, and unwavering in the face of an entire offseason's worth of doubt. He didn't need to shout or pound his chest to command respect. He earned it the hard way, by making the right plays at the right time, over and over again. And in doing so, he did more than win a game. He changed the conversation in Cleveland. No longer were fans debating which draft pick was the right one, or when the team might finally find stability under center. That question had been answered definitively and with authority. The Browns have had their share of false dawns, seasons that started with promise and ended in heartbreak. But this time feels different. This time, they have a quarterback who's not just talented, but composed. Not just exciting, but dependable. Week 1 didn't just give Cleveland a win in the standings. It gave them something far more valuable: belief. And belief in the NFL can carry a team a very long way. As Sanders left the stadium that night, walking through the tunnel with the game ball under his arm, fans leaning over the railing shouted his name. Some yelled for autographs. Others just wanted to say thank you. He nodded, smiled, and kept walking. Because in his mind, the work was just beginning. By Tuesday morning, the energy inside the Browns facility hadn't faded. It was the kind of atmosphere teams talk about when they're winning in December, a mix of purpose and pride. But it was only week 1. Coaches were still dissecting film. Players were sore from Sunday's physicality. And yet there was this undercurrent of something different: stability. That's what Shedeur Sanders had brought in just one game. For the first time in years, Cleveland's quarterback room didn't feel like a revolving door. No quiet whispers about who's starting next week. No side-eyeing in the locker room, wondering if the guy under center could actually lead them to wins. Sanders' performance had set a tone. The week began with the standard Monday routine: film review, lifting sessions, treatment for banged-up players. But when the offensive unit sat down to watch the game tape, the coaches didn't just highlight Sanders' throws. They focused on the moments that don't show up on a stat sheet. There was the 3rd and 6, where Sanders recognized a disguised coverage, audibled to a quick hitch, and got the ball out before the blitz landed. There was the second quarter snap where the pocket collapsed, and instead of taking a sack, he threw the ball away, avoiding a drive-killing loss of yards. And there was the subtle shift in protections on the 12-play, 7-minute drive, something veteran quarterbacks sometimes miss, that kept Carolina's rushers from getting home. Every time the film froze on his decision-making, you could see the offensive line leaning forward in their seats. Protecting a quarterback who knows where he's going with the ball is different. It makes their job easier, cleaner, and it builds trust. During Tuesday's walkthrough, Sanders was already onto the next opponent. The Browns were prepping for a road game against a defense known for disguising pressure and baiting quarterbacks into mistakes. It was exactly the kind of test analysts had been waiting for. If week 1 was his grand entrance, week 2 would be the let's see if he can do it again moment. The practices leading up to the game had a different rhythm now. Receivers worked on more complex route combinations, knowing Sanders could hit them in stride. The offensive line was more vocal, pointing out blitz looks pre-snap during drills. Even the running backs were sharper in pass protection sessions, matching Sanders' habit of calling out protections himself before the snap. Dillon Gabriel, now in the backup role, wasn't sulking. In fact, he'd taken it upon himself to help Sanders prepare for different defensive looks. Between reps, he'd point out potential hot routes or share tendencies he'd seen on film. That unselfishness didn't just help Sanders, it helped the entire quarterback room. By Friday, the team boarded the plane with a confidence they hadn't carried in years. The media was cautious, reminding everyone it was just one game, but inside the building, no one was treating it like a fluke. The Browns knew that if Sanders could execute on the road, in a hostile stadium, the conversation would shift from good debut to legit franchise quarterback. Game day came, and the atmosphere in the visiting stadium was exactly what you'd expect: loud, aggressive, and laser-focused on rattling the rookie. The opposing fans chanted before every snap, waving signs and jeering every incomplete pass. The home defense came out swinging, loading the box, and sending disguised blitzes from multiple angles. The first quarter was a grind. Sanders had to absorb a sack early and missed on a sideline throw to Cooper when the corner jumped the route. But he didn't spiral. On the next possession, he took what the defense gave him: short outs, quick slants, a couple of screens to slow down the pass rush. Midway through the second quarter, with the Browns trailing by 3, Sanders saw his chance. The defense showed a too-high look, but he recognized the nickel creeping toward the line. He called for a protection shift, took the snap, and hit Njoku on a seam route for 28 yards. That throw broke the defensive pressure, and a few plays later, he zipped a touchdown pass to Cedric Tillman in the back corner. From that point, the game tilted. Sanders started finding his rhythm, spreading the ball around again. 6 different receivers caught passes by halftime. The running game opened up as linebackers had to respect the pass, and the Browns went into the locker room with a 4-point lead. In the second half, the hostile crowd got their moment. On an early third-quarter drive, Sanders took a hit as he threw, and the pass sailed just a little high, glancing off the receiver's hands and into a defender's arms. Interception. It was his first turnover of the season, and the stadium erupted. Here's where a lot of rookies unravel, on the road, after a mistake, with momentum swinging to the other side. Sanders? He walked to the sideline, grabbed a tablet, and started reviewing the play with his receivers. There was no slumped posture, no visible frustration, just correction. When he got the ball back, he engineered a drive like nothing had happened. He hit a quick out to Cooper, found Njoku on a drag route, and capped it with a 15-yard strike to Elijah Moore for a touchdown. Just like that, the interception was a footnote, not a headline. The Browns' defense locked things down from there, and the game ended with Cleveland on top by 2 scores. Sanders' stat line wasn't as eye-popping as Week 1. 17 completions on 27 attempts, 2 touchdowns, and the lone interception. But the performance was arguably more impressive because of the way he handled adversity. Back in the locker room, Stefanski praised the team's composure, but he singled out Sanders' response after the turnover. "That's how you lead," he said. "Mistakes happen. It's what you do after that counts." The media picked up on it too. The post-game narrative was less about the numbers and more about the poise. "This is what separates him," one analyst said on a late-night highlight show. "You can teach mechanics. You can't teach this kind of bounce-back mentality." The following week at practice, you could see the shift in how veterans interacted with him. Sanders wasn't just the young guy under center anymore. He was their quarterback. The defense started challenging him more in practice, knowing he'd rise to the occasion. Receivers were running crisper routes. The O-line was more vocal in meetings. By week 3, Cleveland was 2-0, and the buzz was starting to get louder. National reporters were flying in to cover practices. Sanders' name was popping up in early Rookie of the Year conversations. And through it all, he stayed steady. 2 games don't make a season, he told a crowd of reporters. We've got work to do. That work showed up in week 3 against a top-tier defense. The opening drives were ugly, 2 punts and a sack. But then Sanders started reading the defense like a book. He audibled out of bad runs, checked into quick slants against soft coverage, and started moving the chains. The highlight came late in the second quarter. 3rd and 10, heavy blitz, pocket collapsing. Sanders stepped into the pressure and delivered a strike down the seam to Cooper for 25 yards. The stadium erupted, not for the catch, but for the guts it took to stand in and make it. Cleveland won again, moving to 3-0. The conversation around the league shifted from nice start to this could be real. And inside the Browns' locker room, there was no debate left. Shedeur Sanders wasn't just holding the job. He had claimed it for the foreseeable future. The numbers were solid. The wins were piling up. But the bigger story was what was happening off the stat sheet. The Browns, for the first time in decades, had an identity built around stability at quarterback. And in Cleveland, that was worth more than gold. By the time the Browns reached week 4, the feeling in Cleveland was unlike anything the city had experienced in years. Not just because they were undefeated, not just because the offense was finally clicking, but because for the first time in decades, the quarterback position wasn't a weekly mystery. Shedeur Sanders wasn't a placeholder or a stopgap. He was the guy. And everyone in the building knew it. In team meetings that week, Stefanski didn't have to manufacture confidence. He didn't need to play the next man up card or talk about being patient with a young QB. Instead, his message was simple: we keep stacking wins. It was a mentality shift that players could feel. When you believe your quarterback can handle any situation, the entire game plan opens up. That week's opponent was a divisional rival, a team that had historically thrived on making life miserable for Cleveland's signal callers. They disguised coverages, mixed pressure packages, and fed off rookie mistakes. The pregame narrative was predictable. Sanders has looked good, but wait until he faces this defense. From the first snap, it was clear Sanders had studied them inside out. On the opening drive, he came out firing, quick completions to get into rhythm, hard counts to draw the defense offside, and a perfect play-action strike to Cooper down the sideline for 31 yards. The crowd at home was deafening. The drive ended in a touchdown to David Njoku. And just like that, the rookie jitters storyline died on live television. The rival defense threw everything at him in the first half: zone blitzes, delayed safety blitzes, stacked boxes to kill the run game. And yet, Sanders kept finding answers. On one play, with a corner blitz screaming off the edge, he slid protection, bought himself a fraction of a second, and hit Elijah Moore on a shallow cross that turned into a 22-yard gain. Those are the kinds of adjustments you expect from a 10-year vet, not someone playing his 4th NFL game. But the real magic came late in the second quarter. Cleveland was up by 3, facing 3rd and 12 on their own 18-yard line. The rival crowd was so loud the linemen could barely hear the cadence. Sanders took the snap, stood tall as the pocket collapsed, and dropped a dime, 40 yards in the air, right into Cooper's hands between 2 defenders. It was the kind of throw that deflates a defense and ignites a stadium. For plays later, they were in the end zone again. By halftime, the Browns were in control. But Sanders wasn't celebrating. He was sitting on the bench with the tablet, scanning through defensive looks, making notes for the second half. That's what impressed the coaching staff the most. He wasn't just playing well, he was preparing in real time, adjusting, and staying ahead of the game. The second half was all about game management. The rival defense was desperate, sending more pressure, but Sanders refused to give them the big mistake they were hunting for. On one fourth-quarter drive, the Browns bled almost 8 minutes off the clock, running a mix of short passes and inside runs, converting 3 separate third downs. Sanders capped it with a perfectly placed back shoulder throw to Njoku for his 3rd touchdown pass of the day. When the clock hit 0, the scoreboard read 27-13, and the Browns were 4-0. Sanders' stat line, 21 of 29 for 258 yards and 3 touchdowns, was efficient, surgical, and turnover-free. But even more than the numbers, it was the way he controlled the game that stood out. In the locker room afterward, there was no champagne, no over-the-top celebration. just a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you belong. Garrett came over and slapped Sanders on the back. "Keep driving the bus," he said. "We'll keep clearing the road." The national media couldn't ignore it anymore. Monday morning shows were running graphics, comparing Sanders' first 4 starts to some of the best rookie quarterback stretches in history. Analysts who'd been skeptical were now grudgingly praising his pocket presence and decision-making. And in Cleveland, the fan base was already talking playoffs. Week 5 brought the first major challenge in the form of a road game against one of the league's most hostile environments, a stadium known for deafening noise, and a defense that thrived on feeding off the crowd. All week, Sanders practiced with simulated crowd noise cranked to absurd levels. The coaching staff emphasized silent counts, quick reads, and avoiding negative plays. On game day, the noise was every bit as intense as advertised. The opening drive stalled, and the opposing team jumped to an early lead. This was the first time in Sanders' short career that he was playing from behind on the road. The second drive started badly. A sack on first down, a false start, and suddenly it was 2nd and 18. The crowd was frothing, sensing another defensive stop. But Sanders stayed calm. He hit a quick 12-yard pass to Njoku, then threaded a slant to Cooper for the first down. That small sequence quieted the stadium just enough for him to work. From there, the Browns put together their most impressive drive of the season. 14 plays, 85 yards, chewing up nearly 9 minutes of clock. Sanders converted 2 third downs and a 4th down, finishing the drive with a play-action rollout and a strike to Tillman in the back of the end zone. It was the kind of possession that drains a defense physically and mentally. The game remained tight through the 3rd quarter. With the Browns clinging to a 3-point lead late in the 4th, Sanders had a chance to put it away. Starting from his own 10-yard line, he orchestrated a masterclass in clock-killing football, short, high-percentage throws, smart scrambles to stay in bounds, and complete control of the pace. By the time the drive stalled at midfield, the opposing team had burned all their timeouts and had less than a minute to work with. The Browns' defense sealed the win. After the game, Stefanski called Sanders the calmest guy in the building, which was saying something considering the chaos around him for 4 quarters. At 5-0, Cleveland was now one of the league's biggest stories, and Sanders was the undisputed face of it. Fans weren't just showing up on Sundays, they were packing practice sessions, wearing his jersey, and chanting his name during warm-ups. Local businesses were naming sandwiches and drinks after him. Kids in schoolyards were pretending to be Shedeur Sanders during recess. Inside the building, the players' trust in him had fully matured. In 2-minute drills during practice, no one questioned his calls. When he audibled at the line, the offense moved without hesitation. That kind of instant respect doesn't happen unless a quarterback has proven himself over and over again. And Sanders had. By mid-season, it wasn't just about the record anymore. The Browns were starting to talk openly about playoff seeding, about taking the division, about playing meaningful football in January. And for once, it didn't sound like wishful thinking. It sounded like a plan. Through it all, Sanders never wavered from his approach. Win the day, stack good reps, prepare harder than anyone else. And it showed not just on the stat sheet, but in the way his teammates rallied around him. The Browns had spent years searching for a franchise quarterback. In Shedeur Sanders, they'd found one. And with each passing week, the rest of the league was realizing it too.